All right, so today we're going to talk about political legitimacy. You will see by the end of this lecture why I think it's so important. I look at it as a kind of foundational concept, and if it's a strong reality in a democratic society and a democratic political system, it gives democracy a lot of immunity in tough times. It enables it to weather storms and so on. And if it is not robust as a normative and behavioral phenomenon, then democracy is vulnerable when it doesn't kind of deliver very utilitarian benefits. That's the logic of the concept and the argument. I want to stress that legitimacy is not just something for democracies. All political systems require some belief that the system is the right system of government. And as you'll see, there is a reason why this is uniquely important for democracies. So I follow my late professor and mentor, Seymour Martin Lipset, in thinking of legitimacy, not just in normative terms, but really in moral terms, as a moral title to rule. It's the belief, now we're talking about political legitimacy, it's the belief that the political system that is in place in the country, the system of government, is the best system for the country, the right one, the morally right one for the country, that it is justifiable and that it deserves allegiance. That means when the government passes laws, people should voluntarily obey them because the government is exercising legitimate authority. When it taxes, people should pay their taxes because the government has a moral, legitimate claim through the whatever political process resulted in the taxes to extract resources in that way from people. When there's a conflict and it calls on people to serve the country, the people should answer the call because the government is a morally right form of government, is exercising morally justifiable authority. So that is where we get the moral title to rule, the authority and moral claim to be able to command people's obedience, to tax and draft, to legislate and to enforce laws, and to ensure a stable political order. Now, the question then is, how do we recognize this? There are lots of behavioral ways we can recognize this and recognize the absence of this. Let's first talk about the attitudinal ways we can measure this. Attitudinally, these are some of the measures we use in public opinion surveys, which you're going to see beginning on Thursday, statistical data for, to determine whether there are high levels or low levels of not just political legitimacy in general, but legitimacy for democracy as a system of government that's prevailing in the country. So we can say, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Coming from, remember the famous statement by Winston Churchill? Anybody know what he said that this is an adaptation of?
Democracy is like the best out of the worst or something.
Okay, well, you're close, yeah?
Democracy is the worst form of government except for those that have been tried.
Yeah, right. Okay, and of course we want to pay homage to Churchill as Britain is having its existential debate today on whether to go ahead with Brexit or not. In any case, yes, so it's kind of democracy by default. Democracy is the worst form of government ever tried by human society. except for all those other forms that have been attempted from time to time. Churchill was famous for quotes. Another one that I'm very fond of is, which I think kind of resonates now in the current moment, you can always trust the United States to do the right thing after it has exhausted all the other alternatives. So I'll just leave that there. This is the kind of comparative statement. Well, it may not be great, but compared to all the other options, it's better than any other form of government. And then you can ask, well, which statement do you agree with? Democracy is always preferable to any other form of government, number one. Number two, sometimes, not defined, just kind of generally put out there, an authoritarian government can be preferable. Or for someone like me, you know, I just don't care. Give me whatever you've got. That is another way of asking it. The third is, these are different kind of public opinion research strategies. You give people two statements. You ask, which do you like more? Which do you agree with more? The first is, we should choose our leaders through regular, open, and honest elections. And the second is, since elections produce bad results, we should choose other means for selecting our country's leaders. Which of these three do you think generally elicits the highest levels of support and which the lowest? Anyone want to guess?
Probably the bottom is the one that people like will want to use the most.
The bottom is the one that what?
That people will want to use the most when giving their polls.
That they would be most likely to choose one at a higher rate than they choose democracy in the other two items? Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other?
I would think, I guess it depends on where you do it. Maybe in the U.S., maybe number one would be chosen more because people may have these ideals.
Okay. Which would be the most likely to elicit hesitation about democracy? Well, logically, it might be this one because you're giving people three options. You're letting them say they don't care, and you're letting them say, well, you know, I don't want to reveal myself to be a fascist, but yeah, sometimes an authoritarian government, sorry, this is a typo here, it should be in and not any. Sometimes an authoritarian government can be preferable. We have most often settled on this middle item as a test of democratic legitimacy by the direct method. Because, you know, it's a somewhat higher standard, you've got to choose the one out of the three, and you've got to use the word always and reject even the possibility that someday, under some circumstance, an authoritarian government might be preferable, and you've got to reject the option of apathy. So it's a little bit more demanding. Now, does anyone see any kind of conceptual or methodological problem with measuring democratic legitimacy with these kinds of questions?
Perhaps, maybe if people already live in a democracy, that they may have a different answer just because they don't want to seem like they're against the status quo or something.
Okay. What were you thinking?
Lacks a little bit of nuance, perhaps. Maybe only having three answers. Like maybe there's different forms of authoritarian government. There's different forms of democracy. Maybe giving people more options to point towards. I mean, different countries as examples. There's also the issue that different people have different levels of knowledge about.
Okay, so first of all, they're kind of vague conceptual questions, right? Democracy, what does that mean? And second of all, you've got a potential social desirability problem here. If democracy is prevalent in the country, if people perceive that is kind of the general norm in the country, do they want to reveal themselves to not be democratic or go against what is seen as socially desirable? This is a kind of general problem in public opinion polling, by the way. And this is why, with these first two questions, do bear in mind we're using the word democracy. It may be vague to some people, and it may invoke this social desirability problem. So this is why some of my colleagues who do the public opinion polling tried to pin it down this way by saying, well, okay, forget about the word democracy, we'll give people two options. And of course, this is just testing electoral democracy. Of course, we want to know not only what are their orientations toward electoral democracy, but to what extent do people sign up for commitment to the broader architecture of liberal democracy, and what's the kind of broader orientation toward authority and toward tolerance and toward some of the other dimensions of democratic political culture that I'm going to introduce next week that people have. So this week, not today, I want to hold you in suspense a little bit. I'm going to give you a lot of data about how people answer these kinds of questions, about support for democracy as the most morally right, the most legitimate form of government. And next week we'll kind of probe more deeply what various authors say about political culture, what it is, and how people actually respond to a broader array of questions. Okay, so this is one strategy to get at the problem of measuring democratic legitimacy. A different strategy is to just push democracy aside and, kind of take the inverse strategy to the Churchillian hypothesis. And if the argument is that democratic legitimacy flows from embracing it, at least by default, because there's nothing else better, we can ask if they think there's something else better. And I really like these questions a lot because I think they really do kind of bring to the surface latent reservations about democracy or obviously authoritarian inclinations. So now I've got a subterranean purpose here, which is to try to persuade you that this public opinion research has value, adds to our knowledge, is worth doing, and is really kind of both the social science method, but a bit of an art form too. Because we've got to ask these questions in a way that do not bias the respondent. You can't say, well, we know democracy is the best form of government, but, might you be willing to betray it for some fascist impulse by choosing some other option? And when you're asking these questions, it's got to be in a kind of very neutral, straightforward tone. There are many ways to form a government. We're not saying one is better than another. So would you disapprove or approve of any of the following alternatives? How about having only one political party be able to stand for election and hold office? How about having the army come in to govern the country? How about having putting an end to elections in parliament and just letting the president decide everything? And so we'll see, again, I'm holding you in suspense till Thursday, how publics around the world react to these questions.